All right, so we're going to be looking at the top 10 first basemen for 2020 now. And again, we're doing this based off of MLB Network's show, their top 10 right now positions that they do. So we're using their list. Some guys have multiple qualifications. Like, for example, if they didn't already pre-tape this, weeks ago, they would have Miguel Sano on. But they're not having him there because at the time, he was at third base for the Twins and they didn't have Josh Donaldson yet. So keep that in mind. That's why we go off of their list so that we're consistent with them so that we can compare our list. But let's start off with some honorable mentions here real quick and get into it with Christian Walker. Now, he had a nice breakout season that really made the loss of Goldie more palatable for Arizona Diamondbacks fans. Now, he was not Paul Goldschmidt, but he was quite good, especially with Goldschmidt being a little down for what we're used to from him. The two are actually a lot closer than you might realize for the 1 year. Christian Walker had a 259 average, 348 OBP, and 476 slug, which was really nice for him. 29 home runs. He had 2.2 WAR. His defense was okay by most metrics, maybe a little bit below average, but he actually was pretty solid and second at first base in the recently released infielder outs above average. It's a new metric that they've had the outfield ones for a while, but the infield ones are tougher to tie down, and they finally have come up with a metric for that. And he had 9 outs above average at first base, second in the league. So great year for Christian Walker. He is kind of a late breakout, so he may plateau from here or even go down. He's going to be 29, and this was his first full season. But I got him an honorable mention here. Next up is a guy I really like, but I couldn't quite get him on the list yet. That's Luke Voit. If you look, he's now essentially had a full season with New York. If you add up the two parts, a part of 18 and then last year, which was actually a part of a season too because of injury. But he has a 280 average, 384 OBP, 517 slug with 35 homers, 95 ribbies, and 100 runs scored in 658 plate appearances, which is about a full season. 650 is, you played a whole bunch and you're in the top half of the order to get 650. But a strained abdominal and a sports hernia curbed him to just 118 games last year. The dude absolutely smacks the ball, though, as you're seeing in these highlights. Top 10% barrel rate at 13%, top 6% in walk rate at 14%. That kind of power and patience is just an excellent combo to deliver power. And he takes advantage of Yankee Stadium. Even though it's obviously more favorable toward lefties, it's still good for righties. And if you have opposite field power, which Luke Voit does, you can take advantage. That said, he's a dreadful fielder. And while this is the right position to be a poor fielder at, I still had to keep him in the honorable mention here until we can see him get through a full season and really see where he's at. This one's tough, folks. The other honorable mention is Joey Votto. Hurts my heart. As somebody who is a big fan of statistics and next level analytics, it's really tough to have Joey Votto here. He's kind of the sabermetric poster boy with literally one of the greatest eyes the game has ever seen in terms of his strike zone judgment. And that is obviously represented in walk rate, but also strikeout rate. This is a guy who at his peak was darn near 1-to-1 with the two metrics for quite a while. In fact, in 2012, he was better. He had more walks than strikeouts, which is just insane. It's taken a little bit of a tumble in the past couple years. Well, actually, just last year, I should say, 2019 only, because he was actually at 1-to-1, a little bit more, few more walks than strikeouts in 2018, but then down to 0.6 walks to strikeouts, meaning 13% walk rate, 20% strikeout rate. 20% is good for so many guys, but Votto has lived below 20 his entire career. Meanwhile, his walk rate has lived in the mid to high teens. So to be down at 12.5%, 13%, that's tough. And that really, he could no longer hide the power outage that he had. Back in 2018, he had a 417 OBP and that obscured the fact that his power had fallen off because he still generated a 130 WRC plus. That's weighted runs created plus. 100 is average, so he was still 30% better than league average, despite mediocre power. Well, the power continued to dwindle in 2019, and both his strikeout and walk rates got worse, rendering him with a 101 WRC plus, meaning he was 1 percentage point better than league average. In other words, he was league average, because 1% is just not that useful to be like, hey, I'm 1% better than league average. He was basically average. And for Joey Votto, that's so far down from his career. Just to put it in perspective, his career is 151 WRC plus. He's a whole half player better than the league on average. So you're basically getting one and a half players worth of production in one spot. And this year he was simply average. The lowest WAR of his career at 0.7. That was even worse than the year he only played 62 games when he had 0.8. At age 36, does he have one last kick? There's speculation that despite the games played total that he had of 142, that he was playing through some injuries, in his lower half especially. Power comes from your base, whether you're pitcher or hitter. And his seemed compromised each of the last 2 years, despite him playing 145 and 142 games. We'll see if there's a rebirth there and maybe get some power back. But as it stands right now, it's too hard. Even at a light first base position this year, I just couldn't get him into my top 10. That moves us on to Edwin Encarnacion, who, believe it or not, was actually more of a first baseman last year than DH. Now, he only played 108 games, but 57 were at first base versus 51 at DH. He's going to DH in 20, though, with the White Sox. Jose Abreu, while not some elite defender, should find more time there than Edwin. And Edwin just keeps on ticking. Now, I talked about this, I hinted at this with Joey Votto about how his strikeout and walk rates are so strong. And generally what that ensures is a graceful aging. And we've seen it with Edwin Encarnacion too. For such a premium slugger to not strike out, today's game, if you strike out 25% to 30% of the time, but you're an elite slugger, that's just accepted, even though that's a high strikeout rate. When somebody like Encarnacion, who pops 30 plus homers like every single year, in his heyday, he struck out like 10 to 15% of the time. I guess he only had 10% 1 year. So he's mostly living in the mid-teens from 14 to 16% through his peak. So as he's aged, he's only inched up to like 20, 21% while still maintaining a strong walk rate with 16, 11, and 12% the last 3 years. Interestingly enough, despite playing 22 fewer games, he actually had 2 more home runs than he did than he did in 18, going from 32 to 34, despite the 93 fewer plate appearances. He was actually kind of adequate at defense as well. He had 1 out above average. Not terrible for somebody who's definitely not known for defense in any capacity. Outs above average is not the only defensive metric, though, so the other ones graded him pretty harshly. But he tied with Votto with the 1 out above average. So these excellent strikeout walk rates and the power are going to ensure that he continues to age gracefully. If he can stay healthy enough to play, at least 130 games, he should continue his streak of 30 home run seasons. Next up is Yuli Gurriel for the Houston Astros. Now, he loved the bouncy ball as much as anybody. Put it in perspective, in 2017 and 18, combined, he had 31 homers. In 2019 alone, he had 31 homers. He had a 12 home run July, which yielded an absurd 408, 437, 847 line. He's always had an elite contact rate. And this year he paired it with power to make him really, really impressive. He doesn't strike out. He's always been good for batting average. But when you add in the kind of power that Gurriel showed this year, it was incredible. And, obviously all the stuff that's surrounding Houston right now, trash cans and buzzers, I don't know how much it impacted him, though. It's impossible to say one way or the other, so I'm not going to sit here and say it had no role, but I'm also not going to pretend that that was the only reason that he amped up. When you have a hit tool like his, finding that power is not impossible. consider that in 2017, he had a 187 ISO, which is pretty good. 200 is when you really start to become a power hitter, and then anything beyond that, you're really moving up in class. And he had a 243 in 2019, so he was really premium power. But a 187 definitely hints at some real punch. He just didn't really have it in 2018, and then 2019 he spiked. So whether it was trash cans, buzzers, the baseball helped as well, and everything went well for Gurriel. And similar to the last two guys we've talked about, his elite contact rate. Now, he doesn't have the walk rate of Encarnacion and Votto, but his elite strikeout ability and lack of strikeouts is going to ensure that he'll continue to age gracefully, even going into his age 36 season. Next up is Carlos Santana, and what a great season this was from him, huh? He was one of the absolute best at the position. He was third among these candidates that we have here today, including the honorable mentions, in WAR. And frankly, he was second because two were tied at the top, and so he had the second highest total at 4.4 WAR. Interesting to have a spike here at age 33, but those who are big fans of Santana have always been thinking that there could be more, particularly with his batting average. His power's been there. Again, I'm keeping the theme here. Elite walk, elite strikeout guy. He is just like Encarnacion in that respect, and even Votto. He just never had the batting averages of Votto. But for his career, he has a 17% strikeout rate and a 15% walk rate. That's fantastic. It's almost 1-to-1. So his batting average has always kind of lagged behind because his BABIPs are pretty bland. 259, 259, 229 are his last three batting averages coming into 19. And then he hits 281 because the BABIP goes up a little bit, changes a little bit on his launch angle, starts to hit a few more line drives, and all of a sudden things turn out a bit better for Carlos Santana. He actually, interestingly, more ground balls benefited him. A lot of guys are trying to get the ball up these days to get their power. Well, he had the power, so actually hitting the ball on the ground a little bit more, got a few more hits through the infield, and all of a sudden he's hitting 281. Even if he doesn't keep all the batting average gains, I still really like this guy because he's always going to get on base at a really strong clip. He's got quality power, so even at age 34, first base is a little bit of an old position right now. I definitely like him. As far as the defense goes, you're not really getting anything out of Carlos Santana except trying to get about average. He had -1 on the outs above average, and his defensive contribution to the WAR is not particularly strong. But again, at first base, notice I'm not highlighting defense a lot for anybody because it's just not a main contributor to their bottom line. All right, next up is one of the big breakouts of the season. For some reason, did I not go over to Santana there? What happened there? Huh. I might have messed up there. But anyway, next up is Josh Bell. And pardon me if the Santana highlights didn't come up. I thought I clicked over. But next up is Josh Bell. Obviously had an amazing season. Big breakout for him. He had a 135 WRC plus thanks to a 277, 367, 569. Nice line with 37 homers, 116 ribbies, and 94 runs scored. There wasn't much to write home about it in Pittsburgh this year. They had a lot of turmoil, and then, of course, off the field stuff with one of the most awful people in baseball. So nothing really went right for them outside of a few bright spots. Josh Bell was one such bright spot. He was killing it. This was a guy who actually showed some power in 2017, but then seemed to really lose it in 2018, and it was kind of a bummer. He brought it back and then some this year. Some of it his own development, some of it probably the bouncy ball. It's a mix. It's never just one thing with anybody, really. He doesn't strike out a whole lot, and if he can maintain this power, he's going to be one of those guys who is going to be kind of like Encarnacion and Santana, though not quite to their level. He doesn't walk as much as them, and he strikes out a little bit more than both of them in their peak. But he's going to be 27, and Josh Bell, I think he can hold some of these power gains from this year. As far as his defense goes, though, he's actually quite quite poor. So it does ding him a little bit and keep him down on this list. He had one of the worst defensive seasons as far as the first baseman that we're looking at here in this top 10 list and the honorable mentions. -5 on the outs above average. Only 4 players were worse at all of first base, not just from the group that we're looking at today. And then as far as his defensive WAR contribution, it was the worst of the group that we're looking at today. So Josh Bell, as long as he continues to hit, he'll be all right. So it looks like I missed the Santana highlights, and I apologize for that because they were some really good ones. So I guess I misclicked. Pardon me. Next up, Big Meat Pete. I don't know if Baseball Reference uses that as his nickname. The Polar Bear is what they use. That's a great nickname, by the way. Pete Alonso, the Rookie of the Year, with an absolutely remarkable season, popped 53 home runs, 260, 358, 583, slash line, 26% strikeout rate. This is what I'm talking about, right? Premium power, 26% strikeout rate, that's fine. Back in the day, you get laughed off your team if you struck out that much. Like, very few guys struck out like that. It's just a different game that we're in now. That's why these guys that have the elite power that don't strike out, I keep highlighting it because Pete Alonso is the norm. Those guys are the exception, because I got no problem with 26% strikeouts if you're going to hit for that kind of power and walk 10% of the time. Those two things absolutely work out for me. I'll just get it out right now. His defense, crummy. It's not end of the world bad, but it's not good either. -6 on the defensive runs saved and -7 on outs above average. That was actually dead last at first base, 40th out of 40. Just behind Eric Hosmer. So Eric Hosmer's better than somebody at something. So good for him. But what can we say about Pete? I mean, he just had an excellent season. I think coming off such an electric rookie season, we should expect some peel back. The league's going to study the book on him this year and really try to figure out how to attack him. But he did lead all first basemen in WRC Plus at 143. So hats off to him. He played 161 games. He won the home run derby. Electric season. I got him at number 6. Now, breaking into our top 5. Got a little bit of a bounce back candidate here in Paul Goldschmidt. I mentioned him earlier when I was talking about Christian Walker. He's actually, surprisingly, of the 13 guys that we're talking about when you include the honorable mentions, he's 11th in WRC Plus for 2019 at a 116 mark. Now, if you look over the last 2 years, which is the scope that MLB Network is looking at when they're judging these guys for their list, he bounces all the way up to 6. So one of the things that we have to be careful of, just as a baseball community in general, is not taking the most current year and saying that's who this guy is, because it's just not how it works. There's a reason that the most basic projection system takes a 3-year average and spits it out and is generally pretty accurate, even though it's not sophisticated at all. I'm not even talking a weighted one where you weight, 2017 a little, 2018 a little bit more, and 2019 the most. I'm saying just 3-year average and take that for everybody. It's a fairly useful projection system for as basic as it is, because guys change. They go up, they go down. There's all sorts of differences. This was clearly Paul Goldschmidt's worst season. And there were probably different factors. I've always preached how I'm cautious of a guy going into a new environment their first year. This is mainly for pitchers, but it can be for everybody. You just don't know how things are going to transition, particularly a guy who spent such a long time with a club. I mean, Paul Goldschmidt was drafted back in 2009 and then spent until 2018 as a Diamondback. And then he goes and becomes the man with the Cardinals, or, has high expectations on him. Not that he's not used to being the man, but you like a year for transition. And so even in an off year, he was still a solid 3-win player, hit 34 homers, 97 ribbies, 24% strikeout, 11% walk. It was all pretty much there. A 303 BABIP held him back a little bit. Paul Goldschmidt's always run high BABIPs, 348 for his career, so that was down. So I think there was some bad luck. I think there was some underperformance. He had some crummy months. He had some great months. All in all, I think he's going to be fine. That's why I still have him number 5. His defense was okay. Actually, let me find him here on the outs above average because I didn't write a note about it. Pardon me, it was more than okay. He was third. Actually, Christian Walker beat him and so did another guy who we haven't gotten to. But other than that, he was third on outs above average. And then as far as defensive WAR goes, his contribution was top 6 here. He was still a negative. So the thing of it is, with the way WAR is calculated, it's hard to be plus defense at first base because there's a positional value. The way they calculate it, and I don't want to get into all the ins and outs of how WAR is calculated, but there's a positional penalty there, or else the offense would just send it sky high. So he was 5th as far as defensive WAR goes among the guys that we're talking about here. All right, next up into the top 5, going to number 4, we have Matty O. First off, I'll start with the defense on him because this is actually pretty strong. I just got done saying how it's hard to have a positive contribution. Well, Matt Olson does it, and he was number 1 in outs above average at first base with 12. 3 clear of Walker and 7 clear of Goldschmidt. So he really had some space between him and the next guys there. Great stuff out of Matt Olson there. Their corners, the Mats are great for them. Matt Chapman, one of the very best defenders in all of baseball, but don't sleep on what Matt Olson's able to do at first base as a positive contributor there. He had 13 defensive runs saved after 14 last year, so this is no fluke. Matt Olson's a great defender. Now, at the dish, he's quite excellent as well, and I think we're sitting on a 40 homer season brewing. Probably even upwards of 45 if things really break right for him. When you consider that he hit 36 in 127 games, I don't even think that 45 is out of bounds. Even in Oakland, which isn't the easiest park to hit home runs out of. He had a 134 WRC+, 267, 351, 545, the 36 homers I just mentioned, 91 ribbies, 73 runs in 127 games. Imagine if we got this guy a full season. Injuries have been a little bit of a bugaboo each of the last 2 years. And so that's something that's definitely holding Matt Olson back a little bit. Pardon me. Just last year, 2018, he played 162 games. Misspoke there. But I still think we have yet to see the best of Matt Olson. He's going into his age 26 season. He's one of the absolute best first basemen in all of baseball. I got him number 4. At number 3 is Max Muncy. You don't like the ranking? Go get it out of the ocean then. I don't care. Because this guy's an absolute monster. Now, if you're looking over the last 2 years, the scope that we're focused on, 18 to 19, or 18 and 19, his 10 WAR is the best at the position. A position that includes a couple guys we haven't talked about, and Paul Goldschmidt, and Matt Olson. His 10 is tops. Now, he does get a little bit of a boost artificially over his peers by playing different positions, second and third, and doing so adequately. So there is that, but the fact of it is, there's still the 10 wins there that really bring it home for him. And he is good defensively at first. He has 3 defensive runs saved. What can you say about him? He followed up that breakout out of nowhere 2018 with another damn good season. In fact, he was tied with Pete Alonso for the top WAR at first base in 2019 at 4.8. We'll call it 5. You round up. The 0.2 is not really a big difference. 251, 374, 515 with a 25% strikeout rate, but a 15% walk rate. So the batting average is a little bit challenged, and if you've been in this stream long enough, you know we don't focus on batting average. If you have a great batting average, that's good. Like, I'm not saying it's never useful, but having a mediocre one or a decent one like a 251 is not the end of the world when your on base is 374. That is incredible. 35 homers, 101 runs, 98 ribbies. Max Muncy is a beast. He's hit 35 each of the last 2 years, 162 and 134 WRC plus, back-to-back 5-win seasons at age 29 with defense to boot and flexibility, which this is a first base ranking, so I don't want to overrate that he can play second and third. Some of these other guys maybe could too. They're just not asked have to. Like, I don't know, maybe Matt Olson could play other positions, but he sure as hell isn't getting to third base with Matt Chapman there, and there's no real need to put him at second base either. So I can't give too much to Muncy for being able to do that, but it is a nice little sprinkle on top of what he's already able to do. So that leaves us with 2 guys left. Number 2 is Anthony Rizzo. And at this point, it seems like Anthony Rizzo's just become boring for folks to the point where he's a bit underrated. A little bit. Obviously people know who he is. They respect that he's good. He's not hidden. So I want to be careful using that term to suggest that, like, nobody knows the Chicago Cubs first baseman who's been doing it for, like, almost a decade now. But he doesn't always get his due as still being one of the top caliber guys, because he just keeps putting up the same season, the same ho-hum 4 to 5 win season. And I put ho-hum in quotes. I mean, I'm being sarcastic. That's not ho-hum. That's awesome. That's all-star worthy. I mean, that's, he's like one hot month away in any of these last, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In any of these last 6 seasons, he's won like Yuli Gurriel July away from being in the MVP race. Like, that's how close it is. Because he's already been like really, really good. So if he just had like another month with 5 or 6 more homers and a 420 average instead of 360 or something, then all of a sudden we're talking about him as an MVP. That's how close something like that can be. So Anthony Rizzo just keeps getting it done. His defense vacillates a bit. He's also pretty flexible defensively, but as I just mentioned, we don't want to overrate that too much. But they know that they can kind of ask different things of him. Joe Madden wasn't afraid to kind of move him around in different shifts. He didn't play different positions, but he's always been capable at first and certainly flexible with what he can do. Outs above average didn't really like Rizzo. Let me see where they put him. Yeah, they put him at a -3. But defensive runs saved, which is a different thing altogether. Just because they don't agree doesn't mean that one's right, one's wrong. They're kind of measuring different things. They had him at a +3. Defensive runs saved did. So bottom line is Rizzo's perfectly capable defensively. I don't think you're really losing much with him at your defensive position. And I have to say, over the last 2 years, his WAR is 5th at the position with a very, very, very nice 6.9 WAR. And number 1, to the surprise of, I hope, nobody, with all due respect to all the rest of the candidates here, but this should not be a surprise to anybody that Freddie Freeman is number 1. Freef God is an absolute beast, and he is, I think, even more so than Rizzo, underrated. Again, in the same realm of star underrating, right? If you want to break up being underrated into different classes, Anthony Rendon was there until this past year, where he was just a boring superstar. That's almost what Freeman and Rizzo are. It's not the same as, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of somebody who is more mid-tier but underrated because of how good they are. Like, probably until this year, until he really started to get his shine, Matt Chapman, I think, was like underrated and kind of hidden because he plays in Oakland. But again, everyone knows Freddie Freeman. That this isn't a case to suggest that, like, more people need to understand who he is. But more people need to give him his due, or at least make sure that they're not kind of glossing over him just because he's steady. There's almost like a punishment of consistency. And again, I'm using these terms lightly because nobody hates on him. He's still getting paid, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we need to appreciate the greatness sometimes, even though it's kind of a steady, boring excellence every year. And that's definitely Freddie Freeman, to pretty much the same level and a little bit more than Anthony Rizzo. 5, 4, 3, 6, 4, 5, 4 are his WAR totals over the last, 7 years that I mentioned. His WRC plus just in the last 4 years, 152, 150, 137, 138. I mean, he's just an absolute monster. And he really took a power step forward this year from 18. He really started to get on the power train in 16. His slugging went from 195 to 267 and then up to 280, but then back to 196 and then up in 19 to 255 with a career high 38 homers, 121 ribbies, and 113 runs. He just gets it done. And like a lot of the guys we talked about earlier, he doesn't strike out. and he walks. You know, a great comparison for him early in his career, which we've lost sight of because the other guy's fallen on hard times, is Votto. He has a lot of Votto-esque qualities, at least early on. Now, if you were asking Cincinnati folks, because for a lot of years, Votto actually caught a lot of heat for taking too many walks. Even from the announcers, they would say stuff like he shouldn't walk, he should swing more. They were probably looking at Freeman and saying that's what we want out of Votto, because Freeman never really has the 15, 16, 17, 18% strike or walk rate, excuse me. He lives more in the 10 to 13% range and swings a bit more, drives in more runs, and to a degree you can understand that. But at the same time, I think it's foolish to hate on Votto for what he's done when you see the consistent performance there. It's like, I don't know that him swinging at a few more pitches was going to make such a grave difference in what they were able to do throughout Votto's peak. But that's a discussion for another time. This is about Freeman and his excellence. As far as defense goes, he kind of vacillates a little bit as far as the metrics go. But 4 of the last 5 years, he's been positive in defensive runs saved. And as far as outs above average, he was at 2. So he was, a little bit above average, perfectly capable there. I think his teammates are always happy. His pitchers are happy to have him at first. His infielders are happy to have him scooping over there at first. And I wouldn't be surprised, even going into his age 30 season, I wouldn't be surprised if we still haven't seen his true best year. Currently, it stands at 2016, even though this year he set career highs in home runs, and ribbies, actually. But that was a 152 WRC plus and 6 WAR. I wouldn't be surprised if there was still like a 7-8 win season in there with 40 homers and like a 310 plus average. At 30, you're not projecting it. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but it's similar to that Rizzo thing where he's so good all the time that it just takes like a one more excellent 10-game stretch to send him over the top. Because everything he does already is great. He had 38 homers, 121 ribbies, 113 runs last year with a 295 average. Another 10-game stretch of hitting 500, all of a sudden that turns it up to 310 with 43 homers and 130 ribbies. So he's already pretty much there. Freddie Freeman is a god, and he's number 1 on my list. And frankly, he should be on everybody's. I do think he's one of the few positions that has a no-brainer at the top that you'd have a hard time arguing. But if he isn't, I'd love to hear who is. Running it back from the honorable mentions to number 1, we have Christian Walker, Luke Voit, Joey Votto catching honorable mentions. At number 10, Edwin Encarnacion. Number 9, Yuli Gurriel. 8, Carlos Santana. 7, Josh Bell. 6, Pete Alonso. 5, Paul Golden Rings. That was a Christmas joke and very stupid. 5, Paul Goldschmidt. 4, Matt Olson. 3, Max Muncy. 2, Anthony Rizzo. And number 1, Freef God himself, Freddie